The storm had been building all afternoon, and Caroline knew with a sinking certainty that her mother-in-law was about to make good on her threats. The year was 1883, and the small ranch outside Abilene, Texas had become Caroline's prison since her husband Thomas died 6 months ago from pneumonia. At 22 years old, she found herself a childless widow living under the iron rule of Martha Brennan, a woman who had never accepted her son's choice of bride. Martha had made it clear from the beginning that Caroline, a farmer's daughter with no dowry to speak of, wasn't good enough for the Brennan name. Thomas had been her buffer, her protector, but now he was gone, and Caroline had nowhere else to go. The wind howled outside the ranch house, rattling the wooden shutters as the sky turned an ominous shade of gray-green. Caroline stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she dried the supper dishes. Martha sat in the parlor, her needlework forgotten in her lap as she stared at Caroline with cold calculation. "You burned the biscuits again," Martha said, her voice cutting through the sound of the rising wind. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "The oven runs hot on the left side, and I—" "Excuses. Always excuses with you. My Thomas deserved better than a useless girl who cannot even manage a simple meal." Martha stood, her black mourning dress rustling as she moved toward the door. "I have tolerated your presence here out of Christian charity, but my patience has limits." Caroline's heart began to race. She recognized the dangerous edge in Martha's tone, the same one that preceded the worst of her cruelties. "Please, Mrs. Brennan, I will do better. I promise. Get out!" The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Caroline stared at her mother-in-law, hoping she had misheard over the wind. "What? You heard me. Get out of my house. You are no longer welcome here." Martha walked to the front door and pulled it open. The wind immediately tore through the house, sending papers flying and extinguishing 2 of the oil lamps. Rain had begun to fall in heavy sheets, and the temperature had dropped dramatically. "Mrs. Brennan, please. There's a storm coming. I cannot—" "You should have thought of that before you disrespected me under my own roof. Out. Now." Caroline stood frozen, unable to believe this was happening. Martha had been cruel before, making her sleep in the cold attic, denying her adequate food, working her to exhaustion with endless chores. But this was different. This was dangerous. The storm looked like it could turn into something terrible, and night was falling fast. "Please," Caroline begged, tears streaming down her face, "I will sleep in the barn. Just do not make me leave the property." Martha's face twisted with rage. She crossed the room in 3 swift strides and grabbed Caroline by the arm, her fingers digging in painfully. With surprising strength, she dragged the younger woman toward the open door. Caroline struggled, but Martha was fueled by months of resentment and hatred. With one final shove, she pushed Caroline out into the storm. Caroline stumbled down the porch steps, landing hard on her hands and knees in the muddy yard. The rain immediately soaked through her thin cotton dress and apron. She turned back to see Martha standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the warm lamplight behind her. "Do not come back," Martha said coldly. "You are dead to me, just like my son." The door slammed shut, and Caroline heard the unmistakable sound of the bolt sliding into place. She ran back up the steps and pounded on the door, her fists making dull thuds against the thick wood. "Please, Mrs. Brennan, please, I am sorry, let me in!" She screamed until her throat was raw, but there was no response from inside. The lights in the windows went dark one by one as Martha moved through the house, deliberately ignoring Caroline's pleas. The wind picked up even more, and Caroline realized she had to find shelter or she would die out here. She was already shivering violently, her teeth chattering so hard she thought they might break. She had no coat, no hat, nothing but the dress on her back and the thin leather shoes on her feet that were already soaked through. She stumbled away from the house, heading toward the road. Maybe she could make it to the neighboring ranch, the one owned by the widow Patterson. It was at least 3 miles away, but it was her only hope. The rain came down harder, and the wind pushed against her with such force that she could barely move forward. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the flat Texas landscape in brief, terrifying flashes. Caroline had been walking for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes when she realized she was lost. The road had disappeared in the darkness and rain, and she had no idea which direction she was heading. Her legs felt like lead, and the shivering had progressed to full-body tremors. She knew the signs of cold exposure from when her father had nearly died after falling through ice one winter. She needed to find shelter immediately. Through the driving rain, she saw a darker shape ahead, a building of some kind. She forced her legs to move faster, hope surging through her. As she got closer, she realized it was just an old, abandoned line shack, half collapsed and open to the elements. Still, it was better than nothing. She crawled inside, huddling in the driest corner she could find, and wrapped her arms around herself. The cold was unbearable. Her dress clung to her skin, stealing what little warmth she had left. Her lips had gone numb, and she could barely feel her fingers or toes. She tried to stay awake, knowing that falling asleep in this condition could be fatal, but her eyelids grew heavier with each passing moment. She thought of Thomas, of their brief year of marriage before the sickness took him. He had been kind to her, gentle in ways that surprised her given how he had been raised by such a harsh woman. They had planned to move away from his mother's ranch to start their own place where they could build a life together. But then came the fever and the cough and the blood, and suddenly Caroline found herself a widow with no money and no way to escape Martha's control. Caroline's eyes drifted closed. She thought she heard hoofbeats, but she was probably imagining it. No one would be out in this weather. No one would come looking for her. She was going to die here, alone and unwanted, and Martha would probably be relieved. The hoofbeats got louder, and then she heard a man's voice calling out over the storm. "Hello? Is someone there?" Caroline tried to respond, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. She heard boots splashing through mud, and then a tall figure appeared in the opening of the line shack. Lightning flashed, and she saw a man's face, weathered and concerned, beneath the brim of a wide hat. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, ducking inside and kneeling beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Caroline managed a small nod. The man pulled off his oiled canvas duster and wrapped it around her, then lifted her into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. She wanted to protest, to tell him she could walk, but her body would not cooperate. He carried her out into the rain and somehow managed to get her onto his horse, a large bay that stood patient despite the storm. He mounted behind her, keeping one arm wrapped firmly around her waist to hold her in place. "I have got you," he said close to her ear, his voice steady and reassuring. "My place is just over the next rise. Hold on." The ride felt both endless and instantaneous. Caroline drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the warmth of the man's body against her back and the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. Then they were stopping, and he was lifting her down, carrying her again. She heard a door open, and suddenly the wind and rain were gone, replaced by blessed stillness. "Let me get the fire going," the man said, laying her gently on what felt like a soft rug. She heard the sounds of him moving around, the crackle of kindling catching flame, and then warmth began to seep into the small cabin. He came back to her side and began to work on removing her wet shoes. "Ma'am, I need to get you out of these wet clothes before you freeze to death. I promise I'm going to be a gentleman about this, but you will die if we do not get you warm." Caroline understood through the fog in her brain that he was right. She tried to help as he carefully removed her dress and undergarments, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible. He wrapped her in what felt like soft wool blankets and carried her closer to the fire. She felt him rubbing her hands and feet, trying to restore circulation, his touch brisk and impersonal, but somehow comforting. "There now," he said softly. "You are safe. Whatever happened to put you out in that storm, you are safe now." Caroline's eyes finally focused enough to see her rescuer clearly. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were a startling shade of blue-gray. His face was sun-bronzed and angular, with the kind of rugged handsomeness that came from years of outdoor work. He had a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and a scar that ran through his left eyebrow, giving him a roguish appearance that was softened by the genuine concern in his expression. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, her voice hoarse from screaming at Martha's door. "No need for thanks. I'm just glad I found you when I did." He stood and moved to the stove, where he put a kettle on to boil. "I'm going to make you some hot coffee and get some food into you, then we can worry about introductions and explanations." Caroline watched him move around the small cabin with efficient grace. The place was sparse but clean, with a bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a stove, and shelves lined with supplies. It was clearly the home of a working cowboy, with tack and rope hanging on the walls and a rifle mounted above the door. But there were touches that spoke of a man who valued comfort. A colorful woven blanket on the bed, books stacked on a shelf, and a harmonica resting on the windowsill. He brought her a cup of coffee, helping her sit up enough to drink it. The hot liquid burned going down, but it felt wonderful. She could feel warmth beginning to return to her core, though she was still shaking. "Easy now," he said, steadying the cup with his hand over hers. "Not too fast, or you will make yourself sick." When she had finished the coffee, he brought her a bowl of stew that he warmed on the stove. It was simple fare, just beef and vegetables, but it tasted like the finest meal she had ever eaten. She ate slowly, her stomach unused to being full after months of Martha's meager portions. "I am James," he said, settling into a chair near the fire. "James Cordell. I work the Rocking M Ranch about 5 miles east of here. This is my line cabin where I stay when I'm working this section of the range." "Caroline," she replied softly. "Caroline Brennan." Recognition flashed in his eyes. Brennan? Any relation to Martha Brennan over at the Double B? Caroline's expression must have given her away because James's face darkened. "She did this to you. She put you out in the storm." "She is my mother-in-law. Was my mother-in-law." Caroline felt tears welling up again. "My husband died 6 months ago, and she never wanted me there in the first place. Tonight she decided she had had enough of me." James cursed under his breath, standing and pacing to the window. "I have heard talk about that woman in town. Heard she was hard as nails and twice as sharp. But to put someone out in weather like this, that is attempted murder in my book. She hated me from the moment Thomas brought me home. I tried so hard to please her, to be a good daughter-in-law, but nothing I did was ever good enough." "The fault is not yours," James said firmly, turning back to face her. "A person who would do what she did tonight has something broken inside them. You could have been perfect as an angel, and she still would have found fault." His words broke something loose inside Caroline, and she began to cry in earnest. James looked uncomfortable for a moment, then knelt beside her and pulled her into an awkward but comforting embrace, keeping the blankets firmly wrapped around her. "You are safe now," he murmured. "I promise you, you are safe." They stayed like that until Caroline's tears subsided. When she finally pulled back, James stood and cleared his throat, his ears slightly red. "You should rest," he said. "Take the bed. I will sleep in my bedroll by the fire." "I cannot take your bed." "You can and you will. You have been through hell tonight and you need proper rest." His tone brooked no argument. He helped her to her feet, keeping the blankets wrapped around her, and guided her to the bed. "Your dress is hanging by the fire to dry. Should be ready by morning." Caroline lay down, and the softness of the mattress after months of sleeping on a thin pallet in the attic almost made her weep again. James pulled another blanket over her, tucking it around her with surprising gentleness. "Sleep," he said softly. "We will figure out what to do come morning." But Caroline could not sleep despite her exhaustion. Her mind raced with fear about what would happen next. She had no money, no family to take her in. Her parents had died of cholera 3 years ago, and she had no siblings. She had nowhere to go and no prospects. The reality of her situation was terrifying. "James?" she called out softly into the darkness. "Yes?" "What am I going to do?" There was a long pause. "We will figure it out. Try not to worry tonight." But how could she not worry? She was utterly alone in the world, dependent on the charity of a stranger who had no obligation to her. Morning would come, and with it, impossible decisions. Despite her fears, exhaustion eventually claimed her, and Caroline fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's single window. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. She sat up, disoriented for a moment, then remembered everything. She looked around and saw her dress, now dry, folded neatly on a chair beside the bed. James was nowhere to be seen. She dressed quickly, grateful for the privacy. Her dress was wrinkled but clean, and someone, James presumably, had even brushed the worst of the mud from it. When she emerged from behind the curtain James had apparently rigged to give her privacy, she found him outside, tending to his horse. "Morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Sore, but better." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly shy in the daylight. "Thank you for everything you did last night. You saved my life." "Could not very well leave you out there to die." He finished with the horse and walked over to her. In the daylight she could see him even more clearly. He was tall, at least 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who worked hard for a living. His clothes were typical cowboy fare: worn denim pants, a chambray shirt, and scuffed boots. But everything was clean and well-maintained, speaking to a man who took pride in himself. "I've been thinking," James said, his expression serious. "You cannot go back to Martha Brennan, that much is clear, but you need somewhere to stay and you need work." "I know. I just do not know where to start. The thing is, I could use some help." James rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. "The Rocking M is a big spread, and we are short-handed right now. We lost our cook last month when he decided to head to California, and the boys have been making do with their own terrible cooking ever since. The boss, Mr. McAllister, has been talking about hiring someone but has not gotten around to it. If you can cook and are willing to work, I think I could convince him to take you on." Hope flared in Caroline's chest. "I can cook. I can cook well when I have decent ingredients and an oven that works properly, and I can clean and mend and do laundry and tend a garden." "Then it is settled. We will ride over to the main house today and talk to Mr. McAllister." James paused, then added, "I should warn you, though. A ranch full of cowboys is no place for a lady used to gentle treatment. The men are rough around the edges and the work is hard, but they are good men, every one of them, and they will treat you with respect or answer to me." "I am not afraid of hard work," Caroline said firmly, "and I think I can handle rough edges better than I can handle cruelty disguised as propriety." James grinned at that, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "I believe you can. Now let me fix us some breakfast before we head out. I am not much of a cook, but I can manage bacon and eggs without poisoning anyone." They ate together at the small table, and Caroline found herself relaxing in James's presence. He was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that made her laugh despite everything she had been through. He told her about his life as a cowboy, about the years he had spent drifting from ranch to ranch before settling at the Rocking M 3 years ago. "This is the first place that ever felt like home," he admitted. "Mr. McAllister is fair, pays on time, and does not work his men to death. And the land here, there is something about it that gets into your blood. I cannot imagine leaving now." "Do you have family?" Caroline asked. His expression shuddered slightly. "Not anymore. My parents died when I was young, and I was raised in an orphanage in St. Louis. Ran away when I was 14 and headed west. Been on my own ever since." "I am sorry. That must have been hard." "It was what it was. Made me who I am." He stood and began clearing the dishes. "We should get moving if we want to reach the main house before noon." The ride to the Rocking M Ranch was beautiful. The storm had left everything green and fresh, and wildflowers were already beginning to bloom in the grass. Caroline rode behind James on his bay horse, acutely aware of his solid presence in front of her. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from falling, and she could feel the warmth of his body through his shirt. The main house of the Rocking M came into view after about an hour's ride. It was a sprawling structure built of wood and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around three sides. There were several outbuildings, a bunkhouse, a barn, a stable, and what looked like a cookhouse. Cattle dotted the fields in every direction, and the whole place had an air of prosperity and good management. James helped Caroline down from the horse, and she was grateful when her legs held steady beneath her. A man emerged from the house, older than James by perhaps 20 years, with gray threading through his brown hair and beard. "James, did you make it through the storm all right last night, Day?" the man called, then stopped when he saw Caroline. "Who is this?" "This is Mrs. Caroline Brennan, sir. I found her near dead in the old line shack last night. She was caught out in the storm." James's voice was carefully neutral, but Caroline could hear the anger underneath. Her mother-in-law locked her out of the house during the worst of it. Mr. McAllister's expression darkened. "Martha Brennan did this?" "Yes, sir." "That woman is a menace." He turned to Caroline with a kind smile. "You are welcome here, Mrs. Brennan. Any enemy of Martha Brennan is a friend of mine." "Thank you, sir. And please, call me Caroline." "Only if you call me Samuel." He gestured toward the house. "Come in, both of you. Let us talk about this properly." Inside, the house was comfortable and well furnished, with the touches of a woman's hand evident in the curtains and the arrangement of furniture. Samuel led them to a dining room and called for his wife. Mrs. McAllister appeared a moment later, a plump, cheerful woman with rosy cheeks and kind eyes. When she heard Caroline's story, she immediately took her under her wing, fussing over her and insisting she must be traumatized and needed care. "Samuel, this girl needs a place to stay," Mrs. McAllister said firmly. "I agree, my dear. James here suggested she might be willing to work as our cook if she is able." "I am able," Caroline said quickly. I would be grateful for the work and the chance to earn my keep." Samuel nodded. "Then it is settled. We have a small cabin behind the cookhouse that was meant for a foreman we never hired. It needs some fixing up, but it is sound and private. You can stay there, and in exchange you will cook for the ranch hands and help Mrs. McAllister with the household when needed. We will pay you fair wages, same as we would pay any cook." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes again. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I will work hard. You will not regret this." "I am sure we will not," Mrs. McAllister said warmly. "Now, let me show you to your cabin so you can settle in." The cabin was small but charming, with one main room that served as both living space and bedroom, and a tiny attached room that could be used for storage. It needed cleaning and some repairs, but it had good bones and plenty of light from two windows. "I will send some of the men over to fix that broken step and patch the roof," Mrs. McAllister said, "and I have linens and dishes you can use until you can acquire your own. You start tomorrow, but today you rest and get settled." After Mrs. McAllister left, Caroline stood in the middle of her new home and felt something she had not felt in a very long time: hope. She had a place to stay, work to do, and employers who seemed genuinely kind. It was more than she had dared to dream of just 12 hours ago. There was a knock on the door, and she opened it to find James standing there with his hat in his hands. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said. "This all happened pretty fast." "I am all right. Better than all right, actually. I cannot thank you enough for what you have done for me." "You do not need to keep thanking me, Caroline. I did what any decent person would do." "We both know that is not true. Plenty of people would have ridden right past that line shack, or would have taken me to town and left me at the church. You went out of your way to help me, and then you found me a job and a home. That is not nothing." James shuffled his feet, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Well, I should let you rest. If you need anything, the bunkhouse is just over there. I will be around." He turned to leave, but Caroline called after him. "James, will I see you? At meals, I mean?" He turned back with that smile that made him look younger. "Every day. I am one of those ranch hands you will be cooking for." After he left, Caroline set about making the cabin livable. She swept and scrubbed, arranged the furniture Mrs. McAllister had sent over, and made up the bed with fresh linens. By the time evening fell, she was exhausted but satisfied. She had a home, she had work, she had a future, and she had James, who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. The next morning, Caroline woke before dawn and made her way to the cookhouse. It was a long building with a massive stove, plenty of work surfaces, and a dining area with 2 long tables. The pantry was well stocked, and Caroline felt her spirits lift as she surveyed the ingredients available to her. She set to work making breakfast. Biscuits from scratch, bacon, eggs, fried potatoes, and strong coffee. The cowboys began trickling in around sunrise, drawn by the smells. They were a varied group, ranging in age from barely 20 to well past 50, but they all had the same lean, weathered look of men who worked outdoors. James was among them, and his face lit up when he saw what she had prepared. "Boys, I think we just died and went to heaven." The men needed no encouragement. They filled their plates and ate with the dedication of people who had been suffering through bad food for too long. The compliments flew fast and genuine, and Caroline felt herself blushing with pleasure. "Ma'am, if you cook like this every day, I might just propose marriage," one of the younger cowboys said, then immediately looked mortified. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, I did not mean anything improper." "No offense taken," Caroline said with a laugh. "I'm just glad you enjoy the food." She noticed James giving the young cowboy a stern look and bit back a smile. Over the following days and weeks, she settled into a routine. She cooked 3 meals a day for the ranch hands, helped Mrs. McAllister with various household tasks, and slowly built a life for herself. The work was hard, but it was honest work, and she was treated with respect and kindness. James was a constant presence. He always seemed to find reasons to come by the cookhouse during the day, offering to help carry heavy pots or chop wood for the stove. In the evenings, he would often sit on the steps of her cabin, and they would talk as the sun went down. He told her stories about his adventures as a cowboy, about stampedes and rustlers and long cattle drives. She told him about her childhood on her parents' farm, about the small joys she had found even in her difficult marriage to Thomas. "Did you love him?" James asked one evening, his voice careful. "I did, in a way. He was kind to me, and that was more than many women get. But we barely had a chance to build something real before he was gone." She looked at James in the fading light. "What about you? Has there ever been anyone?" "No one serious. A cowboy's life is not easy on relationships. We are always moving, always working. Hard to build something lasting when you are never in one place long enough." He paused. "Until now, anyway. Like I said, this place feels like home." There was something in the way he looked at her that made Carolyn's heart skip. She had been attracted to him from the beginning, drawn to his quiet strength and genuine kindness, but she had been widowed for only 6 months, and she worried about what people would think if she showed interest in another man so soon. More than that, she worried about being hurt again, about giving her heart to someone who might leave or betray her. But James was not like anyone she had ever known. He was steady and reliable, showing up day after day with that small smile and those kind eyes. He made her laugh with his dry humor and made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her parents died. Slowly, without quite meaning to, Caroline found herself falling in love with him. She could tell he felt the same way. It was in the way his eyes followed her when she moved around the cookhouse, in the way he always made sure she had enough firewood, in the gentle way he touched her hand when passing her something. But he never pushed, never made her uncomfortable. He seemed content to simply be near her, to build their friendship slowly and carefully. 2 months after Caroline arrived at the Rocking M, Martha Brennan came calling. Caroline was in the cookhouse preparing the noon meal when Mrs. McAllister rushed in, her face flushed with anger. "That horrible woman is here," she said. "Martha Brennan just rode up demanding to see you." Caroline's hands started to shake. "I do not want to see her. And you do not have to, but I think you should. if only to let her see that you survived her attempt to kill you and that you are thriving here." Caroline took a deep breath and nodded. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked out of the cookhouse, Mrs. McAllister at her side. Martha sat on her horse in the yard, looking as severe and judgmental as ever in her black mourning clothes. "There you are," Martha said coldly. "I should have known you would land on your feet like the opportunistic creature you are." "Why are you here?" Caroline asked, proud that her voice did not shake. "To inform you that I am contesting Thomas's will. He left the ranch to both of us, but I am claiming that you abandoned your responsibilities and therefore forfeit your share." Caroline stared at her. "Thomas left me part of the ranch?" "Half of it, the fool. But you will not see a penny. By the time my lawyers are done, you will have nothing." "I never wanted anything from you," Caroline said quietly. "You locked me out in a storm and left me to die. If you want the ranch, take it. I want nothing that ties me to you or reminds me of how you treated me." Martha looked taken aback, as if she had expected a fight. "You are a fool to give up your claim so easily." "No, I am free. That is something you will never understand." Before Martha could respond, James appeared at Caroline's side. He must have seen Martha ride up from wherever he was working. His hand came to rest on the small of Caroline's back, a gesture of support and protection. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice deceptively mild. Martha's eyes narrowed as she looked between James and Caroline. "So that is how it is. You wasted no time finding another man to leech off of." "That is enough," James said, his voice hard now. "You will leave this property right now, and you will not come back. If you have legal matters to discuss with Caroline, you can do it through a lawyer in town, but you will never speak to her like this again. You cannot tell me what to do, Cowboy. This is Mr. McAllister's land, and he gave me authority to remove anyone causing trouble. So yes, I can tell you what to do. Now ride out before I have you escorted off." Martha glared at them both, then jerked her horse's reins and rode away at a gallop. Caroline watched her go, and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She turned to James, tears streaming down her face. "She cannot hurt me any more," she whispered. "I am really free." James pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she cried. Mrs. McAllister discreetly withdrew, giving them privacy. When Caroline's tears finally subsided, she pulled back and looked up at James. "Thank you," she said. "Always," he replied, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Caroline, I need to tell you something. I know it has not been long, and I know you are still in mourning, but I cannot keep this to myself anymore. I have fallen in love with you. Completely, utterly in love. You do not have to say anything back, and nothing has to change between us if you do not feel the same way, but I needed you to know." Caroline's heart soared. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since that first night when you saved my life and asked for nothing in return. You have been so patient with me, so kind, and I do not want to wait anymore. I do not care what people think or whether enough time has passed. I love you, James Cordell." He smiled, that beautiful smile that transformed his whole face, and then he was kissing her. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, and Caroline felt like she was finally, truly home. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony in the Rocking M parlor, with the McAllisters and all the ranch hands in attendance. Caroline wore a dress that Mrs. McAllister helped her make, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. James wore his best clothes and looked so handsome that Caroline could barely breathe when she saw him. Samuel McAllister offered them a wedding present, a piece of land on the edge of the Rocking M property where they could build their own home and start their own small ranch. James accepted with gratitude, and they began making plans for their future. But they were in no hurry to leave the Rocking M just yet. They moved into James's cabin together, the one where he had first taken her that stormy night. Caroline continued to cook for the ranch hands, and James continued his work with the cattle. But now they came home to each other every evening, and the cabin that had once been sparse and lonely was filled with warmth and love. That first winter together was hard but happy. They spent long evenings planning the house they would build on their land, sketching designs by lamplight and dreaming of the future. James taught Caroline to ride properly, and she taught him to appreciate good food and the comfort of a well-kept home. In the spring, they learned that Caroline was expecting a child. The news filled them both with joy and a little bit of terror. James became even more protective, constantly worrying about Caroline overdoing it. She had to finally put her foot down and remind him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and that she was perfectly capable of continuing her work. Their son was born in early winter during the first snow of the season. He came into the world squalling and healthy, with a thick head of dark hair like his father's and his mother's gray eyes. They named him Thomas, after Caroline's first husband, because despite everything, he had been kind to her and deserved to be remembered. Mrs. McAllister helped with the birth and took one look at the new family and declared them the prettiest picture she had ever seen. Samuel came to see the baby the next day and announced that he was giving them a small herd of cattle as a christening gift to help them start their own ranch. When little Thomas was 6 months old, James and several of the ranch hands finished building their house on the land Samuel had given them. It was a simple structure, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it was solidly built and full of light. Caroline cried when she saw it, overwhelmed by the reality of having a real home of her own. They moved in on a bright summer day, their belongings fitting easily into the wagon James borrowed. As they approached their new home, Caroline holding baby Thomas in her arms, she looked at the house and the land stretching out around them and felt a sense of peace she had never known before. "Are you happy?" James asked, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Caroline replied honestly. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that I get to have this life with you." "Believe it," James said, leaning over to kiss her. "This is just the beginning, Caroline. We are going to build something amazing here." And they did. Over the next few years, their ranch grew slowly but steadily. They acquired more cattle, built a barn and a stable, and planted a garden that Caroline tended with loving care. James proved to be a shrewd businessman, and their small operation became known for producing quality beef. Their family grew as well. 2 years after Thomas was born, Caroline gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Sarah, who had their mother's blonde hair and their father's blue-gray eyes. The house was suddenly full of noise and laughter, and James and Caroline would sometimes look at each other across the chaos and shake their heads in wonder at how much their lives had changed. Caroline occasionally heard news of Martha Brennan from people who came through the area. The Double B Ranch was struggling, poorly managed, and losing money. Martha had grown even more bitter and isolated, driving away anyone who might have helped her. Caroline felt a moment of pity for her former mother-in-law, but only a moment. She had chosen her own path just as Caroline had chosen hers. On their 5th wedding anniversary, James surprised Caroline by taking her back to the line shack where he had found her that terrible night. It had been repaired and reinforced over the years, still used as a line cabin for the Rocking M. They stood inside, and Caroline looked around at the place that had once represented the lowest point of her life. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked. "Because I wanted to remind you of how far we have come," James said, taking her hands in his. "That night, you had nothing and no one. You were cold and alone and convinced you were going to die. But you survived, Caroline. You are strong and brave, and you built a whole new life from nothing." "We built it," she corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." "And I could not have done it without you. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to dream of something more than just drifting from job to job. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose." He pulled a small package from his pocket. "I wanted to give you something to mark this day." Caroline unwrapped the package to find a delicate gold locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of their 3 children. It must have been expensive, and she knew James had saved for months to afford it. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "Not as beautiful as you," James said, fastening it around her neck. "I love you, Caroline. I will love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that." "I love you too," she whispered, pulling him into a kiss. They rode back to their ranch as the sun was setting, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink. Caroline could see their house in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney where Mrs. McAllister was watching the children for them. She could see their cattle grazing in the pasture and the garden she had planted bearing fruit. This was her life now. Not perfect, not without struggles and hard days, but hers. Built on love and hard work, and the courage to start over when everything seemed lost. She thought of that girl who had been locked out in the storm, cold and terrified and convinced she would die alone. That girl would never have believed that 5 years later she would be here, riding home to a family who loved her and a future full of promise. But that girl had been stronger than she knew, strong enough to survive, strong enough to hope, strong enough to love again after loss. And that strength had brought her here, to this moment, to this life. The years continued to pass with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Their children grew tall and strong, learning to ride and work alongside their parents. Thomas proved to be a natural with horses, while the twins were fascinated by the cattle and loved helping their father with the herd. The ranch prospered, and James and Caroline were able to buy more land and expand their operation. Samuel and Mrs. McAllister became like parents to them both, filling the void left by their lost families. When Samuel died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 70, James and Caroline were among the chief mourners. Mrs. McAllister decided to move into town to be closer to her sister, and she sold the rocking M to James and Caroline for a price well below market value. "You two have been like children to me," she said when they protested. "I want to know that the land is in good hands, and I know you will care for it the way Samuel would have wanted." The Double B Ranch eventually went to auction when Martha Brennan died alone in her house, found days after her passing by a neighbor who had noticed the livestock unfed. Caroline and James attended the auction, not to bid, but to bear witness to the end of that chapter of their lives. A young couple bought the property, and Caroline hoped they would fill it with more love than it had known in Martha's time. On a warm evening in late summer, when Caroline was 40 and James 45, they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset. Their children were grown now. Thomas was married and working a neighboring ranch, while the twins were finishing their education at a school in town, both determined to become teachers. "Do you ever think about that night?" James asked, reaching over to take Caroline's hand. "The storm?" "Sometimes," Caroline admitted, "but not with pain anymore. It led me here, to you, to this life. I would not change it even if I could." "You gave me everything," James said softly. "A home, a family, a reason to be more than just a drifting cowboy. You made me into the man I always wanted to be." "We made each other," Caroline said, squeezing his hand. "That is what love does. It makes us better than we could ever be alone." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the cattle lowed softly as they settled for the night. The air smelled of grass and dust, and the flowers Caroline had planted around the porch. This was peace. This was home. This was the life that neither of them had dared to dream of in their lonely youths, but which they had built together through years of love and work and faith in each other. James stood and pulled Caroline to her feet, leading her into a slow dance with no music but the sounds of the night. She rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, the heart that had chosen her all those years ago when he could have simply ridden past and left her to her fate. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me that night." "Thank you," he whispered back, "for being worth finding." They danced in the fading light, two people who had been lost and broken and alone, but who had found in each other something worth fighting for. The storm that had nearly killed Caroline had instead blown her into James's path, and from that terrible night had grown a love that sustained them through all the years that followed. And when they finally went inside, closing the door on another perfect day, they did so together, as they would every day for the rest of their lives. because that was what they had promised each other on that long ago wedding day, and that was what they had proven true every day since. That love, real love, endures through every storm and emerges stronger on the other side. Their story had begun with an act of cruelty, with Caroline locked out in the cold with nowhere to turn, but it had become a story of hope and healing, of two lonely souls finding completion in each other. It was a story of the American West, of hard work and harder choices, of building something from nothing and making a life in a wild and unforgiving land. But most of all, it was a love story. The kind of story that proves that even in our darkest moments, when we are cold and afraid and certain that no help is coming, salvation might be just over the next rise. And sometimes that salvation comes in the form of a cowboy on a bay horse, riding through a storm to find us and bring us home. Years later, when Caroline was an old woman with silver hair and James had long since earned his rest beneath the Texas soil, she would tell their grandchildren about that night, about the storm and the cruelty and the fear. But mostly she would tell them about the moment she heard hoofbeats through the rain, about strong arms lifting her to safety, about finding love when she had given up all hope. "Your grandfather saved my life that night," she would say, her eyes distant with memory. "But more than that, he gave me a reason to live. He gave me all of this." And she would gesture to the ranch, to the family gathered around her, to the legacy of love they had built together. And her grandchildren would listen, wide-eyed and enchanted, learning the lesson that Carolyn and James had learned all those years ago, that love is worth fighting for, that family is what you make it, and that sometimes the worst storms lead us exactly where we need to be. The ranch continued to thrive long after both James and Carolyn were gone, passed down through generations who knew the story of their ancestors and treasured it. The house they had built with their own hands still stood, weathered but strong, a testament to the foundation they had laid. And if you visit that land today, locals will tell you that sometimes on stormy nights you can see two figures on the porch, dancing to music only they can hear. James and Caroline, forever young, forever in love, forever home. Because true love does not end with death. It echoes through the generations, inspiring those who come after to believe that they too can find their person, their home, their happy ending. They're happy. It reminds us that we are all capable of being saved and of saving others, that we all have within us the strength to survive the storms and build something beautiful on the other side. That is the legacy of Carolyn and James, of a woman locked out in a storm and a cowboy who brought her home. A legacy of love that endures, unchanging and unending, as permanent as the Texas sky and as wild as the land they tamed together. And that is how their story ends. Not with an ending at all, but with a love that goes on forever, written in the land they worked and the family they raised and the life they built together. A love that began with rescue and grew into something magnificent, something that proves that even in the darkest storms, hope survives. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, hope comes riding on a bay horse with kind eyes and gentle hands, ready to lift us up and carry us home where we belong.